Hi guys, tonight we begin a calm journey into the hidden world of espionage during World War II. A world that unfolded not in the bombed streets of London or Berlin, but in the quiet neutrality of Switzerland and the tense atmosphere of Spain. These countries, each in their own way, became crossroads of spies, diplomats, and secret deals. In this story, we'll slowly explore how ordinary streets, hotels, and cafes turned into the stage for one of history's most secretive battles. Before we get started, if you enjoy exploring hidden corners of history at a slower pace, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. I'd love to connect with you there. Switzerland, though neutral, found itself at the very centre of Europe's intelligence war. Surrounded by Axis powers on almost all sides, it became a natural hub for spies from Britain, Germany, the United States, and the Soviet Union. In cities like Zurich, Geneva, and Bern, information flowed quietly through discreet meetings, coded messages, and subtle exchanges. Swiss neutrality provided a convenient cover. Foreign embassies could operate openly, while behind the scenes, intelligence officers disguised as diplomats carried out their missions. Hotels, particularly the grand establishments near the train stations and lakes, were filled with guests who were much more than tourists. A man reading his newspaper might actually be passing signals to a contact across the lobby. A woman ordering tea could be quietly delivering a report written in invisible ink. The air itself seemed to hold secrets, yet the streets remained calm and ordinary to an untrained eye. One of the most remarkable aspects of Switzerland during the war was its reputation as a safe meeting ground. Here, representatives of both Allied and Axis powers could exist in the same space, often within a few blocks of each other. Imagine walking down Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich and knowing that in the same cafes, both German agents and American officers were sipping coffee, sometimes even aware of each other's presence. It created an atmosphere of constant watchfulness. Spies knew they were being watched, and yet the game went on, day after day, like a silent performance in which every glance, every handshake, and every delayed step carried meaning. The geography of Switzerland made it a perfect listening post. Its mountain passes and train routes connected Germany, Italy, and France, making it both a thoroughfare and a trap for those who carried secrets. Border stations became critical points where couriers risked capture with each crossing. Some carried microfilms hidden in pens, others smuggled documents sewn into their coats. Many lived with the knowledge that a single slip could end their mission and their life. Yet for all the danger, Switzerland offered something rare, a place where information could be gathered from all directions. Allied intelligence services found opportunities to learn about German troop movements, industrial output, and even whispers of the developing weapons programs. At the same time, German intelligence kept close watch on its enemies, trying to uncover plans that might threaten their control of Europe. But espionage was not always about daring chases or coded telegrams. Much of it involved quiet patience, hours spent in libraries piecing together information from open sources, days of waiting in cafes for a contact to arrive, long nights of radio transmissions sent from attics hidden behind shutters. These moments may seem uneventful, but they were the threads that wove together a vast fabric of intelligence, influencing decisions made far away in London, Washington, or Berlin. The neutrality of Switzerland did not mean safety for everyone. Espionage often blurred into betrayal, and those caught in the act could face severe consequences. The Swiss government, determined to preserve its neutrality, kept a close watch on foreign agents. Arrests happened, and sometimes deportations followed, though many activities were quietly tolerated as long as they did not directly threaten Swiss security. In this balance between tolerance and control, Switzerland became the stage for a quiet but powerful drama, one that shaped the course of the war in ways the public would only learn decades later. While Switzerland's neutrality created a web of quiet intrigue, Spain during the Second World War was a very different landscape for espionage. Officially, Spain under General Francisco Franco declared itself neutral, but the reality was more complex. Franco's regime leaned toward the Axis in the early years of the conflict. partly out of gratitude for German and Italian support during the Spanish Civil War. At the same time, Spain's strategic location, guarding the passage between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean at the Strait of Gibraltar, made it a place where Allied and Axis intelligence services both invested enormous effort. In Madrid, the atmosphere was heavy with suspicion, but also buzzing with hidden activity. Diplomats, journalists, businessmen and tourists, each one of them could have been something more. In elegant cafes along the Gran Via or in dimly lit restaurants near the Prado, secret conversations were carried out under the cover of casual meals. Madrid became a city where nearly every hotel lobby could have doubled as an intelligence office. German intelligence maintained a strong presence, using Spain as a base to monitor British naval movements and to coordinate with sympathisers across Europe. At the same time, British intelligence ran extensive networks to counter German influence. One of the most striking features of espionage in Spain was how the lines between official politics and secret operations blurred. Franco's government sometimes tolerated espionage, sometimes turned a blind eye, and occasionally used it to its own advantage. This meant that spies operated in a world that was neither fully hidden nor fully exposed. They lived in a constant state of uncertainty, never sure who might be listening at the next table, or whether their supposed ally was secretly passing information to the other side. Gibraltar, under British control, was one of the most critical points of the war in the Mediterranean. German agents in Spain made repeated efforts to gather intelligence on British naval movements there. Sometimes this meant watching from the Spanish side of the strait, using binoculars to record ship traffic, then passing the information to Berlin. Other times it meant bribing local fishermen or dock workers to carry secret messages. Yet the British were equally determined, setting up counterintelligence operations to mislead German observers with false information. This delicate game of deception turned Spain into a battlefield of wits, fought without armies but with rumours, bribes, and carefully crafted lies. Life for spies in Spain could be glamorous on the surface, with elegant suits, fine dining, and nights at theatres, but beneath the surface it was a world of tension. A wrong word spoken too loudly, a careless gesture, or a suspicious meeting could bring the watchful eyes of the Spanish police or worse, rival agents. Espionage here required not only cunning, but also the ability to blend seamlessly into ordinary life, to move invisibly through crowds while carrying the weight of secrets that could alter battles thousands of miles away. Spain's position between two worlds, sympathy for the Axis yet reluctant commitment to true alliance, meant that spies could never feel entirely safe. It was a place of shifting loyalties, where yesterday's friend could become today's betrayer, and where the outcome of the war itself seemed to hover in the balance. In Switzerland, espionage often relied on the art of listening rather than acting. The country's unique position as host to international organisations and conferences gave spies rare opportunities to gather information without raising suspicion. Geneva, with its long tradition as a centre of diplomacy, became a meeting place for officials who could speak freely under the cover of legitimate talks. Yet in the quiet corridors of hotels or the private rooms of embassies, information was exchanged in whispers, passed hand to hand, or encoded into letters that would leave the country disguised as harmless correspondence. Radio played a particularly important role in Swiss espionage. Hidden in attics, cellars, or mountain chalets, radio operators tapped out coded messages late at night, sending intelligence across borders that bristled with soldiers. Signals intelligence was dangerous, as Swiss authorities monitored the airwaves carefully. Those caught could be imprisoned, yet the risk did not stop the flow of messages. For Allied agents, radios were lifelines, turning fragments of news into strategic insight. For German agents, they were channels to relay information about troop movements, weather conditions, or industrial production deep inside Europe. Money and secrecy were the true currencies of espionage. Bank accounts in Zurich and Bern became tools for transferring funds between agents, often disguised as legitimate transactions. A sudden influx of francs into one account could represent payment for a report, or the funding of a covert operation elsewhere in Europe. Switzerland's banking system, with its strict confidentiality, provided both opportunity and cover. though it also attracted the attention of those who sought to expose hidden financial trails. Beyond banking and radios, Switzerland was also a haven for human intelligence. Spies who specialised in personal observation and recruitment, an embassy clerk with access to coded telegrams, a factory worker who overheard conversations about production levels, or a railway employee noting unusual traffic, all became sources of information. These fragments were collected, analysed, and often sold to the highest bidder. In the shadows, there were networks that overlapped, sometimes without their members even realising it. A single courier might unknowingly carry information for both Allied and Axis contacts, believing he served only one master. In such a world, trust was a rare commodity, and suspicion was constant. Many lived in fear of betrayal, yet they continued, driven by loyalty, money, or simply survival. The calm image of Swiss neutrality masked a constant undercurrent of tension. Ordinary citizens might pass a stranger on the street without knowing that he was carrying secrets capable of shaping battles hundreds of miles away. Each handshake, each exchange of envelopes, added another layer to the invisible war being fought across Europe's most peaceful-looking landscape. Spain, unlike Switzerland, carried the weight of its recent civil war into the years of global conflict. The streets of Madrid and Barcelona still bore scars, both physical and emotional, and this created fertile ground for espionage. Many foreign agents saw Spain as a place where resentments and divided loyalties could be exploited. Former soldiers, disillusioned politicians, and displaced civilians became useful contacts for intelligence services seeking information or influence. Hotels in Madrid, especially those around the Gran Via, became hubs of secret life. The atmosphere in their lobbies was charged, filled with men and women who pretended to be casual visitors, but who carefully observed every movement around them. Some of the most notorious espionage exchanges happened not in dark alleys but in the bright lounges of these hotels, where a carefully folded newspaper or a delayed glance carried coded meaning. German intelligence invested heavily in Spain. Agents monitored British activity in Gibraltar and sought to gather details about Allied convoys travelling through the Mediterranean. They recruited locals to observe, record, and report, often offering money or protection in return. Their presence was strong enough that Allied spies frequently found themselves under direct observation, forced to invent clever disguises or misleading cover stories simply to keep operating. The British, however, were equally resourceful. They understood that Spain was too strategically important to ignore, and so they poured resources into counterintelligence. They spread false information, fed misleading reports into German networks, and even created elaborate deceptions designed to confuse the enemy about Allied plans. The most famous of these would later be remembered as part of the larger deception strategies leading up to the Allied landings in Europe, though in Spain they took on a unique flavour, shaped by the country's fragile neutrality. Life for an agent in Spain was never straightforward. On one hand, Franco's regime tolerated espionage to some degree, as long as it did not threaten the stability of the state. On the other, the Spanish secret police kept a close watch, arresting or intimidating those who drew too much attention. For spies, this created a strange double reality: the possibility of operating openly and the constant risk of sudden exposure. What made Spain especially unique was its position as both a participant in and a bystander to the war. The country had suffered so much from its own conflict that it avoided open involvement in another. Yet precisely because of this neutrality, spies found fertile ground. They slipped into the fabric of the cities, hid among ordinary people, and carried out missions that could influence naval battles, diplomatic negotiations, and even the morale of soldiers stationed thousands of miles away. The cafes of Madrid, the ports of Cadiz, and the railways linking Spain to France all became part of a quiet, unseen conflict. Behind the veil of everyday life, a war without uniforms and without front lines unfolded, one where silence, observation, and deception mattered as much as bullets or bombs elsewhere in Europe. In Switzerland, the delicate balance between neutrality and survival shaped the country's approach to espionage. The Swiss government knew its land was filled with spies, yet tolerated much of their presence as long as it did not openly compromise neutrality. At the same time, officials feared being drawn into the war through reckless intelligence activity. This meant that the Swiss police and military intelligence monitored both Allied and Axis networks with careful attention. They arrested agents who became too bold, yet often released them quietly to avoid escalating tensions. This constant push and pull created a unique environment where spies operated under both opportunity and restraint. The mountainous terrain added another dimension to the secret war. Smugglers who once carried goods across hidden trails now sometimes transported microfilms, coded messages, or even fugitives escaping from occupied territories. Crossing these passes was dangerous. Sudden patrols, avalanches, or exposure to the elements could end a mission before it began. Yet the mountains also offered protection, a silent backdrop against which couriers moved through the night carrying fragments of information that, when pieced together, could alter the decisions of generals far away. Swiss cities, though smaller than the capitals of warring nations, were cosmopolitan enough to disguise foreign agents. Cafes in Zurich or Bern buzzed with quiet energy, where a conversation about art or finance might mask a coded exchange. Even libraries and archives became places of espionage, as open-source intelligence, carefully studied newspapers, official bulletins and economic reports provided clues about industrial production or troop movements. Skilled analysts could detect patterns invisible to casual readers, turning mundane facts into meaningful intelligence. The presence of refugees further complicated the scene. Switzerland hosted thousands fleeing from war, among them genuine victims and occasionally agents disguised as displaced civilians. Sorting truth from deception was nearly impossible, and this gave cover to operatives who blended into the larger tide of human suffering. For the Swiss people, the espionage war was mostly invisible. They went about daily life, shopping in markets, walking along lakesides, working in offices, unaware that their ordinary surroundings were layered with hidden meaning. A stranger's pause at a street corner might be a signal. A lost wallet might carry coded numbers. Neutrality kept bombs from falling, but it did not keep the invisible war from weaving through every part of their nation. In this quiet, careful atmosphere, Switzerland became not just a neutral country, but a mirror of Europe's hidden conflict, where calm streets disguised the movements of 1,000 secret hands. Spain's espionage world often revolved around Gibraltar, the British stronghold at the mouth of the Mediterranean. For Germany, controlling information about this narrow strait was critical, as it allowed them to track Allied convoys heading toward North Africa. German agents, operating from Spanish soil, watched shipping lanes with precision, sometimes using binoculars from coastal villages, sometimes bribing fishermen to report what they saw. These reports passed through Madrid, often reached Berlin within days, influencing submarine operations in the Atlantic. For the Allies, Gibraltar represented both a fortress and a target of deception. British intelligence knew they were being watched and turned the constant surveillance into an opportunity. They staged false activities, spread misleading rumours, and carefully controlled what could be seen from the Spanish side. In doing so, they attempted to feed the German networks just enough truth to keep them confident, while slipping in lies that distorted the larger picture. One famous example was the crafting of deceptive shipping patterns designed to make German observers believe convoys were smaller or moving differently than they truly were. Spanish society itself became part of the intelligence web. Journalists who filed seemingly ordinary reports sometimes worked secretly for one side or the other. Businessmen who travelled to France or Portugal carried more than contracts in their briefcases. Even priests and professors occasionally acted as intermediaries, chosen because their roles allowed them to move more freely without suspicion. Franco's regime walked a fine line, tolerating these activities but never allowing them to threaten Spain's fragile stability. The Spanish secret police monitored meetings, recorded conversations, and occasionally expelled individuals considered too dangerous. Yet at the same time, the government benefited from the presence of foreign agents who brought money, influence, and sometimes information that Spain itself could use. For the spies, Madrid was a city of both danger and possibility. A coded message could be slipped across a cafe table with a smile, while outside the same building another agent might be followed down a dark street by men determined to uncover his loyalties. The constant atmosphere of watching and being watched gave espionage in Spain a unique intensity. Unlike Switzerland's calm, professional networks, Spanish espionage often carried a sense of improvisation, of shifting alliances shaped by money, fear, or ideology. It was a city where even casual encounters, an overheard phrase, a misplaced document, a chance meeting on a tram, could ripple into consequences reaching battlefields far away. In Switzerland, the presence of so many intelligence services created an unusual environment where enemies often knew of each other, yet coexisted in the same streets. In Bern, it was not uncommon for German, American and Soviet officers, working under the titles of diplomats or journalists, to live within walking distance of one another. Each day they passed in the corridors of embassies, in the markets, and along the quiet riverbanks, aware that behind every polite nod or casual greeting lay layers of suspicion. This strange coexistence turned the country into a living chessboard, where every move was anticipated and countered. One of the most fascinating elements of Swiss espionage was the use of intermediaries. Lawyers, bankers, and even artists became trusted channels for secret communication. They could meet openly with foreigners without drawing the same suspicion that known officials attracted. A banker discussing investments might in fact be passing financial intelligence about German industry. A painter showing his work to a visiting diplomat might slip in a coded reference, or arrange the time of a later meeting. These subtle exchanges blurred the lines between ordinary life and hidden war. Radio intelligence remained a lifeline, but it also became a point of danger. Operators sending signals across the Alps worked in silence, fearing each knock at the door. Swiss authorities, though tolerant, could not ignore clear violations. Sometimes entire networks were compromised when transmissions were traced to their origin. Yet the flow never stopped, because the demand for information was constant. Allies needed to know about troop movements toward France. Germans needed to predict Allied bombing raids. Each side understood that even a fragment of truth from Switzerland could tilt the balance. Refugees added another layer of complexity. Many arrived carrying nothing but fear, yet among them were people with valuable knowledge, scientists, engineers, or clerks who had fled occupied territories. Intelligence services quickly realized the importance of interviewing them, often under the guise of offering help. A single refugee's memory of a factory schedule or a railway timetable could be transformed into a valuable report. For the refugees, this was both a burden and a risk, as they were never certain whether their words would protect them or put them in greater danger. The Swiss people themselves lived largely unaware of these undercurrents. A shopkeeper selling bread might unknowingly serve both Allied and Axis spies in the same day. A child playing near a hotel could run past the very place where coded documents changed hands. Neutrality kept the nation outwardly calm, but beneath the surface the struggle for knowledge and advantage played out constantly, weaving a hidden pattern into Switzerland's daily life. Spain's espionage world was shaped not only by its geography, but also by the lingering wounds of its civil war. Cities like Madrid, Barcelona and Seville carried deep divisions, and foreign powers sought to exploit them. German agents courted Spanish officers who still admired Hitler for his help during the Civil War, while British operatives worked to sway officials who valued Spain's independence more than alignment with Berlin. The result was a cityscape filled with divided loyalties, where every conversation seemed layered with hidden meanings. Madrid's nightlife, dimly lit and filled with smoke, often served as the backdrop for clandestine meetings. Theatres, clubs, and cabarets provided perfect cover for whispered exchanges. A man might leave his seat during intermission not only to smoke a cigarette but also to slip a folded note into another's hand. In the bustling atmosphere, it was nearly impossible to separate the innocent from the conspiratorial. German intelligence networks in Spain were strong, but they faced constant obstacles. The British Embassy in Madrid became a hub of counterintelligence, where officers carefully tracked the movements of their rivals. They cultivated Spanish contacts, planted misleading stories in local newspapers, and occasionally bribed officials to overlook activities that might otherwise have been punished. The battle for influence was as much about shaping perception as gathering facts. One of the key areas of espionage in Spain was economic intelligence. With resources like tungsten being vital for weapons production, both sides fought to control information about mining, transport, and export. German agents tried to secure supplies for the Reich, while the Allies attempted to cut those lines, sometimes by buying up shipments at inflated prices. Espionage here was not only about secrets, but also about markets, contracts, and control of scarce materials that could determine the outcome of battles far away. Spanish ports also played their role. In Cadiz and Bilbao, foreign ships carried more than goods. They carried whispers of movement, of supply chains, of troop preparations. Dock workers, ship captains, and customs officials became valuable sources, some bribed, others persuaded by ideology. Information from these harbours often travelled quickly to London or Berlin, where analysts sought patterns in the tides of war. For ordinary Spaniards, much of this remained invisible. They lived in a country still recovering from brutal conflict, where bread was scarce and politics were dangerous. Yet without realising it, they often stood alongside figures who carried the fate of campaigns in their pockets. A stranger boarding a train, a guest at a hotel, or a foreigner in a cafe might have been an agent whose decisions influenced battles thousands of miles away. Espionage in Spain was not marked by open violence, but by quiet manipulation, shaping events silently from the shadows. In Switzerland, the complicated dance of espionage often centred around the flow of information through neutral channels. Foreign embassies in Bern acted as official fronts, but behind their walls, intelligence officers used diplomatic privileges to mask clandestine activity. Diplomatic pouches, which by law could not be inspected by Swiss authorities, became perfect containers for microfilm, coded letters, or payments. Couriers walked confidently through train stations carrying documents that could shift military strategies, knowing that their bags were immune to search. This created a paradox. Neutrality offered safety, but it also enabled the silent passage of secrets. One of the most important resources Switzerland offered was access to news from all sides. Because the press was relatively free and foreign newspapers circulated widely, agents could collect information that elsewhere would have been restricted. Analysts scoured articles, piecing together details about production, shortages, or morale. Even public speeches, when examined closely, revealed hints of plans or priorities. This open-source intelligence, though not dramatic, was essential for building accurate pictures of the enemy's strength. Yet not all intelligence was so mundane. Soviet networks operated quietly, often under the cover of émigré communities. They focused on gathering German military information, relying on couriers who risked their lives crossing borders with coded notes hidden in shoes or sewn into seams. At the same time, American and British agents used Switzerland to monitor both Axis activities and each other. The Allies shared goals, but sometimes pursued their own agendas, creating moments of rivalry within supposed cooperation. Espionage here was layered, with overlapping circles of secrecy. Banks remained a critical factor. Accounts in Zurich often held the funds that powered covert networks across Europe. Payments could be disguised as business transactions, investments, or loans. A sudden withdrawal might mean a courier was being paid for a dangerous journey. The veil of banking secrecy made it almost impossible for outsiders to trace these flows, giving Switzerland a role not only as a hub of spies, but also as a treasury of espionage. Daily life in Swiss cities concealed these activities well. Tourists strolled along lake shores, children played in cobblestone squares, and trains ran punctually through Alpine tunnels. Yet beneath this calm rhythm, coded signals moved quietly from hand to hand. A hotel guest might tap twice on a table to confirm identity. A letter with a misplaced comma could carry hidden meaning. The war's battles were far beyond the mountains, but in Switzerland, the war of information shaped the strategies that would decide those battles' outcomes. Spain's espionage story also unfolded along its land borders, which served as arteries for information and escape. The Pyrenees, rugged and treacherous, became a passage for those fleeing occupied France. Refugees, resistance fighters, and sometimes Allied airmen who had been shot down used mountain trails to cross into Spain. These routes, however, were also watched closely by both German agents and Spanish authorities. Guides who led people across the mountains were often confronted with impossible choices: help the desperate at great personal risk or betray them for payment from those who sought to control the flow of people and secrets. Once inside Spain, fugitives often made their way to Madrid or Lisbon, where embassies could offer shelter or passage onward. The British and American legations became safe havens, but getting there required navigating a landscape filled with informers. A refugee's story might be questioned by Spanish police, while at the same time German agents tried to identify which arrivals carried valuable intelligence. This mixture of danger and opportunity turned Spain into both a trap and a lifeline. Beyond human movement, the flow of materials also attracted spies. The mining and export of tungsten remained one of the most fiercely contested elements of espionage in Spain. Tungsten, essential for hardening steel used in tanks and artillery, was produced in Spanish mines in significant quantities. German buyers, desperate to secure supplies for their war machine, offered high prices and pressured the Franco government. The Allies, unwilling to allow these shipments, countered with their own purchases, sometimes buying ore only to stockpile it uselessly, simply to deny it to Berlin. Behind these economic battles, agents worked tirelessly to monitor contracts, bribe officials and sabotage deals. For those involved, it was clear that the war's outcome could be influenced not only on the battlefield but also in the mining towns of Spain. Madrid remained the central hub where this contest played out. In its hotels and cafes, negotiations, betrayals, and covert agreements unfolded daily. A businessman with a suitcase of documents might in fact be a courier for British intelligence. A Spanish officer dining at a restaurant could be receiving a coded warning about German activities. The city itself seemed to hum with invisible tension, where each handshake might signal loyalty or treachery. For ordinary Spaniards struggling with shortages and censorship, these hidden struggles remained distant. Yet the choices made in their capital, the deals struck in offices, the envelopes exchanged in cafes, shaped the larger war. Espionage in Spain was not only about secrets and lies, it was about control of vital resources, safe passage for the hunted, and the fragile balance of a nation caught between two great powers. In Switzerland, espionage was not confined to the world of foreign agents. The Swiss themselves played a delicate role, sometimes as protectors of neutrality, and sometimes as reluctant participants in the game of intelligence. Swiss military intelligence collected vast amounts of information from across the borders, observing troop movements in Germany, Italy, and France. Border guards noted unusual traffic, while train conductors quietly reported the presence of military cargo passing near their stations. This information, though gathered for Switzerland's own defence, often found its way into the hands of Allied services, creating a subtle exchange of favours that never appeared in official records. Swiss industry, particularly in watches, optics, and precision instruments, also became a focus for spies. German and Allied agents alike sought to learn production levels, contracts, and shipments. A seemingly simple order for industrial equipment could hide signals about larger military trends. Engineers and technicians sometimes became targets for recruitment, pressed to reveal secrets in exchange for money or promises of protection. Banking remained one of the most sensitive arenas. Neutral Switzerland provided a safe place for financial transactions, but these accounts were also valuable for intelligence. Tracing the flow of funds could reveal connections between agents, companies, or even governments. Yet Swiss secrecy protected clients fiercely, and spies often relied on insiders willing to share fragments of data. Even a single name connected to a transfer could set off a chain of revelations. Propaganda, too, flowed through Switzerland. Newspapers printed in Zurich or Geneva could reach both Axis and Allied readers, making the country a crossroads of competing narratives. Agents monitored articles, sometimes planting subtle stories designed to sway opinion or send coded signals. A harmless column about agricultural shortages might in reality be a disguised message about military supply lines. Hotels, once again, stood at the centre of espionage life. In places like Zurich's Beau Lac or Geneva's Hôtel des Bergues, guests mingled in lobbies, exchanging glances and words that carried more than surface meaning. To the casual visitor, it was a place of elegance. To the trained eye, it was a marketplace of secrets. Each conversation was shadowed by the possibility that someone nearby was listening, taking notes, or preparing to report back. For ordinary Swiss citizens, the war felt distant compared to those living under occupation. Yet their daily routines intersected with the secret conflict. A clerk in a post office might unknowingly handle letters filled with invisible ink. A porter carrying luggage might be transporting a microfilm that contained plans for an entire military campaign. Life seemed ordinary, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of hidden tension, a reminder that even neutrality could not insulate the nation from the currents of global war. Spain's espionage scene revealed how fragile neutrality could be when two global powers pulled from opposite directions. Franco's government leaned toward Germany during the early years of the war, but at the same time avoided entering the conflict directly. This left room for both German and Allied intelligence to maneuver in Madrid, each side trying to sway ministers, generals and businessmen. The result was a city buzzing with competing interests, where every reception, banquet or diplomatic gathering might double as an intelligence operation. German operatives in Spain worked to track Allied shipping routes, sabotage supply lines, and secure access to resources like tungsten. They cultivated networks of sympathizers, from army officers to local officials, who could provide information or assistance. Their confidence was high, bolstered by Spain's recent reliance on German aid during the Civil War. Yet even in this favourable atmosphere, German agents faced constant challenges. They were watched not only by the Allies, but also by Spanish security forces who kept careful notes on foreign activities. The Allies, meanwhile, saw Spain as a testing ground for deception. British intelligence became skilled at planting false information that would inevitably reach German ears. Sometimes these were deliberate leaks in conversations, staged for listening agents. At other times, misleading documents were left where they could be discovered. The goal was not only to confuse, but to build credibility. By feeding occasional truths, they ensured that the falsehoods carried more weight. Economic espionage remained a central concern. Control of tungsten mines was critical, and agents worked tirelessly to sway contracts. Bribes, secret deals, and pressure from both sides placed Spanish businessmen in precarious positions. Some played both ends, accepting money from Germany while quietly selling information to the British. These double games added layers of risk, for betrayal could come from any direction. Beyond Madrid, Spanish ports and borders were alive with espionage. German agents tracked ships from the vantage points of fishing villages, while Allied operatives intercepted messages and bribed customs officers. The Pyrenees, as always, were pathways not only for refugees but also for couriers. Each crossing carried intelligence in scraps of paper or coded memories, guarded by guides who risked their lives in snow-covered passes. To ordinary Spaniards, these games of shadows were hidden beneath daily struggles. They faced shortages, rationing, and strict censorship, while above them, in the lobbies of hotels or the halls of ministries, powerful men traded secrets that reached battlefields across continents. In Spain, neutrality did not mean stillness. It meant being the stage where the invisible threads of war were constantly pulled and rewoven by unseen hands. In Switzerland, the intelligence war often blended with the world of science and technology. The country's universities and research institutions became quiet arenas where knowledge was exchanged, sometimes openly and sometimes in secret. German scientists passed through on their way to conferences, leaving trails of information about their projects. Allied agents disguised as academics attended lectures or struck up conversations in libraries, hoping to glean details about new weapons or industrial methods. Though Switzerland itself was not building bombs or rockets, it became a window into the scientific progress of the warring powers. One remarkable aspect was the flow of refugees who carried knowledge with them. Jewish scientists fleeing occupied territories often arrived in Switzerland before moving further abroad. Their testimonies about laboratories in Germany or occupied France provided valuable clues to Allied intelligence. A chemist's casual remark about shortages, or an engineer's memory of factory routines, could be turned into detailed reports. These individuals, often simply seeking safety, became unwilling participants in the larger war of secrets. At the same time, Swiss companies were observed carefully by both sides. Firms specializing in optics, precision machinery, or chemicals were pressured to sign contracts with Germany, while the Allies monitored those dealings to understand the scale of German preparation. A shipment of specialized glass or industrial chemicals might reveal more than official reports ever could. Banking again intersected with science, as financial records sometimes hinted at research investments. A sudden loan to a German company could signal a new military project. For spies, following the money was as important as following people. Switzerland's role as a financial hub meant that clues were hidden in ledgers, waiting for skilled eyes to uncover them. Signals intelligence also grew increasingly vital. Allied and Axis radio operators sometimes transmitted from within Swiss borders, despite the risks. Swiss authorities tried to police the airwaves, but the sheer volume of transmissions made complete control impossible. In mountain valleys and city attics, antennas stretched into the night sky, carrying coded bursts of information. Each tap on a key was a gamble. Discovery could mean arrest, but silence could mean losing critical time. For the Swiss government, the challenge was constant. They wanted to maintain neutrality, yet their territory was being used in ways that influenced the wider conflict. They cracked down when activities became too blatant, but tolerated enough to avoid provoking retaliation from powerful neighbours. This balancing act allowed Switzerland to remain formally uninvolved, while serving as one of the most important listening posts in Europe. For ordinary Swiss citizens, the presence of spies was invisible, hidden beneath the calm of daily life. Yet within the walls of universities, companies and embassies, the hidden war of science and secrets quietly shaped the fate of nations far beyond the Alps. Spain's espionage network reached into the very fabric of its society, touching places where ordinary life seemed far removed from war. The railways, for example, became crucial channels of intelligence. Tickets, cargo manifests, and even overheard conversations on trains carried hints of military movement or diplomatic travel. German agents often placed informers among railway workers, while Allied operatives bribed conductors to provide copies of passenger lists. A single journey across Spain might reveal whether envoys from Berlin were meeting Franco's ministers, or whether Allied diplomats were arranging new deals in Lisbon. Ports remained equally important. In Cadiz, Bilbao and Barcelona, ships brought goods, people and information. Dock workers, sailors and customs officials were all drawn into the shadow game, sometimes without realizing it. A casual remark about a ship's destination could be worth far more than its cargo. Allied agents cultivated friendships in these circles, while German operatives relied on networks of sympathizers built during the Civil War. The competition for control of information was constant and intense. Espionage in Spain also took advantage of its cultural life. Theatres and bullfights attracted both locals and foreigners, offering opportunities for discreet meetings in crowded places. A handshake in the stands, a brief exchange during intermission, or even the placement of a coded advertisement in a playbill could pass unnoticed by most, but carried meaning for those in the know. Madrid in particular became a city where appearances often masked intentions. A journalist writing articles for an international audience might be working secretly for one side, shaping narratives and slipping messages into his reports. Franco's regime walked carefully between the competing pressures of Germany and Britain. While many in his circle admired Hitler, Franco understood the risks of openly joining the Axis. He allowed espionage but kept it under watch, using it as leverage in diplomatic negotiations. By tolerating both sides, Spain positioned itself as indispensable while avoiding direct commitment. This cautious neutrality made espionage both easier and more dangerous. Spies could move with a degree of openness, but they also faced sudden arrests or expulsion if their activities threatened the balance. For ordinary Spaniards, daily struggles overshadowed the hidden games around them. Food shortages, rationing, and censorship weighed heavily, while in the background diplomats, businessmen, and strangers in cafes carried on a secret contest that stretched far beyond Iberia. Every transaction, every rumour, every handshake seemed to echo outward into the war itself, making Spain a stage where neutrality became a mask for endless intrigue. In Switzerland, one of the most famous intelligence cases of the war revolved around the so-called Lucy network. This group, centred in Zurich, became a channel through which remarkable amounts of information about German military plans reached the Allies, especially the Soviets. The network's origins were mysterious, but its efficiency left lasting impressions. Reports arrived with uncanny accuracy, describing troop movements, production levels, and even intentions of the German High Command. How this information was obtained remains debated, with some historians believing that German officers sympathetic to the anti-Nazi cause deliberately leaked secrets, while others suggest British intermediaries funneled intelligence through Swiss channels. Whatever the source, Switzerland became the stage where this knowledge changed the course of battles far away. The Lucy network demonstrated the power of Switzerland's unique position. Its neutrality allowed messages to cross borders that were otherwise sealed. Couriers carried fragments of information by train, or concealed them in ordinary correspondence. Codes disguised in commercial telegrams or personal letters travelled safely under the protection of diplomatic pouches. For the Soviets, who received these reports through intermediaries, Switzerland became an indispensable window into the mind of the enemy. Yet such networks also lived in constant danger. German intelligence worked tirelessly to identify leaks, and suspicion often fell on anyone too well informed. Swiss authorities, while eager to preserve neutrality, were aware that allowing such activities risked provoking retaliation. Thus, participants operated in a shadowy world of trust and fear, where betrayal could mean imprisonment or worse. Beyond Lucy, many other networks used Switzerland as their base. The Red Orchestra, a loose web of anti-Nazi groups, found contacts in Swiss cities. Allied officers, disguised as businessmen, attended meetings in lakeside hotels. Messages passed through hands in parks, libraries and train stations, blending seamlessly into daily life. Even a casual conversation in a cafe could conceal layers of coded meaning. What made these operations extraordinary was their quiet persistence. While armies clashed across Europe, in Switzerland the war unfolded in whispers, fragments of paper and cautious signals. Neutrality did not mean absence from conflict. It meant being the quiet heart where threads from all sides converged. For ordinary Swiss citizens, unaware of Lucy or other networks, life continued with routine calm. They walked past the very buildings where secrets that shaped battles like Kursk or Stalingrad were exchanged. Their streets, serene and orderly, hid the invisible weight of decisions that shaped the fate of millions. Spain's role in the war was not limited to being a neutral host for spies. It also became a platform for disinformation campaigns. Both German and British intelligence understood that controlling perception could be as powerful as controlling armies. Newspapers in Madrid, heavily censored but still influential abroad, became channels where carefully planted stories circulated. A brief article about shipping shortages might actually be intended to signal convoy routes to Berlin. A rumour whispered in a cafe could be repeated until it reached foreign embassies, shaped and distorted along the way. British agents grew particularly skilled at feeding half-truths into German networks. One method involved spreading stories through double agents, Spaniards or refugees who pretended loyalty to Berlin while secretly answering to London. These individuals might report Allied troop build-ups or naval movements, but with subtle twists that sent German planners astray. The credibility of such reports rested on their occasional accuracy, which made the falsehoods more damaging. German agents, meanwhile, worked to keep Spain aligned with the Axis cause. They organised propaganda campaigns celebrating Franco's leadership and emphasising shared values with Germany. Posters, pamphlets, and even films highlighted themes of order and strength, attempting to sway public opinion toward Berlin. Yet the Spanish population, weary from civil war, often greeted these efforts with indifference. For them, survival and stability mattered more than ideology. Economic intelligence remained central. The struggle for tungsten shaped both propaganda and espionage. German buyers promised prosperity for mining towns, while Allied agents whispered warnings of exploitation and future ruin. Miners and traders found themselves courted by both sides, caught between promises of wealth and threats of retaliation. Some accepted bribes, others played cautiously, offering fragments of information without committing fully. Spanish ports, again, were vital points where propaganda met espionage. Sailors returning from voyages carried tales of what they had seen: convoys, blockades, bombings. These stories were gathered eagerly by both sides, then reshaped into tools of persuasion. A simple sailor's account might end up in a German intelligence report or a British broadcast, stripped of its original context and refitted to serve strategic goals. For ordinary Spaniards, the disinformation war was subtle but constant. Rumours about shortages, fears of invasion, and claims of victories or defeats abroad circulated endlessly, often leaving people uncertain what to believe. Behind the shifting stories stood networks of spies, each pulling invisible strings. In Spain, the truth was not always the goal. Instead, controlling the story itself became the essence of power. In Switzerland, espionage often depended on the skill of couriers who moved unnoticed through everyday life. These men and women were not famous spies with dramatic stories, but ordinary figures who carried extraordinary burdens. A train conductor might deliver a sealed envelope hidden in his uniform lining. A secretary could carry a coded message disguised as a love letter. Even a student travelling to visit family might conceal microfilm in the spine of a book. Each crossing of a border or passage through a checkpoint was a quiet gamble. The neutral trains that connected Switzerland to Germany, France and Italy became lifelines for intelligence. Observers noted who boarded, who disembarked, and what luggage they carried. The rhythm of the rails provided both cover and danger. The regularity of schedules made travel predictable, yet the watchful eyes of border guards meant a single misstep could undo months of planning. Couriers lived with constant anxiety, aware that an innocent conversation could unravel their disguise. Switzerland's geography provided both protection and peril. Mountain passes offered secret routes, but snowstorms and avalanches made them deadly. Refugees and agents often travelled together, blending in to reduce suspicion. Guides, familiar with hidden trails, led groups across the Alps at night, the crunch of snow underfoot their only sound. These journeys were exhausting, but each successful passage brought new intelligence into neutral territory. Messages were rarely long reports. Instead, couriers carried fragments, a list of factory shifts, a sketch of a bridge, or a rumour overheard in a barracks. Once delivered, analysts pieced these scraps into larger pictures, revealing patterns that could guide military decisions. In this way, the smallest detail, a train timetable, a factory's output, a shipment's destination, became part of a mosaic that shaped the war's outcome. The Swiss government, anxious to maintain neutrality, walked carefully. While they monitored borders and sometimes arrested agents, they also recognised that complete control was impossible. As long as activities remained discreet, they were tolerated. This created an environment where espionage thrived in the grey areas between law and tolerance. For the couriers themselves, life was a mixture of routine and risk. They ate in ordinary cafes, visited markets, and appeared to live simple lives. Yet in their pockets, or hidden in their belongings, They carried secrets powerful enough to shift battles. Their courage lay not in dramatic gestures, but in their ability to move invisibly, to let the war pass through them without leaving a visible trace. Spain's espionage world also relied on couriers, though their routes and risks were very different from those in Switzerland. The Pyrenees formed the most famous passage, with trails winding through rugged valleys and snow-covered peaks. Refugees escaping occupied France often carried not only hope of safety, but also valuable intelligence. Allied agents disguised as travellers slipped across with coded notes, sometimes no more than numbers scribbled on scraps of paper, hidden in shoes or sewn into collars. Each step along the treacherous paths carried the possibility of betrayal, for guides could be bribed and border patrols were unpredictable. Once across, the journey did not end. Couriers had to navigate Spanish police checkpoints, where questions were sharp and documents carefully inspected. Those suspected of carrying Allied information risked imprisonment, while German informers lurked nearby, eager to identify potential enemies. Yet Madrid and Lisbon, when reached, offered lifelines. British and American legations welcomed couriers, using their intelligence to plan operations in North Africa and beyond. Lisbon in particular became a gateway to the wider world, with ships and planes offering passage to Britain or the United States. Couriers carried fragments of intelligence much like their Swiss counterparts, but Spain added another layer, the constant overlap of propaganda. Rumours about invasions, secret treaties or German advances often travelled with them. Sorting fact from fiction was part of the challenge, for even lies could hold clues about the intentions of rival networks. Economic espionage also depended on couriers. Contracts for tungsten sales, shipment schedules, and mining data were carried discreetly from provincial towns to Madrid. A miner's payslip or a merchant's invoice could reveal more than official statements. Both German and British intelligence paid dearly for such fragments, knowing that industrial output could determine the outcome of distant battles. The atmosphere in Spanish cities reinforced the danger. Unlike Switzerland's calm order, Madrid carried an edge of tension. Cafes and train stations were crowded with eyes that watched too closely. A misplaced word could mean exposure. Yet the couriers continued, blending into the crowds, carrying intelligence that shaped the struggle across the Mediterranean. For ordinary Spaniards, these secret movements were invisible. They saw travellers hurrying through stations or strangers passing on the streets, without knowing that within a coat lining or a folded envelope lay details that generals in Berlin or London desperately sought. Spain's couriers, like those in Switzerland, fought their war in silence, their victories measured not in headlines, but in safe arrivals and secrets delivered. In Switzerland, the world of espionage was not limited to coded letters or whispered meetings. It also thrived in the realm of observation. Swiss neutrality meant that diplomats, businessmen and journalists from every corner of Europe gathered in its cities, and each arrival became an opportunity. Allied officers quietly noted who attended receptions at German embassies. German agents recorded which Soviet diplomats lingered in hotel lobbies. Even the simplest gatherings, a concert, a lecture, a charity dinner, were opportunities to observe who spoke with whom, how long conversations lasted, and whether new acquaintances hinted at alliances or betrayals. Observation was a skill cultivated with patience. An agent might spend hours in a cafe, reading a newspaper while carefully watching which strangers exchanged envelopes. Others took rooms in hotels not for comfort but for the vantage point offered by their windows. From behind lace curtains they recorded the comings and goings of embassy staff, noting when cars arrived, when lights went out, and when couriers appeared to depart for the train station. Every pattern mattered, for war is often revealed not only in great battles, but in the rhythms of everyday movements. Photography added another layer. Cameras concealed in bags or disguised as ordinary objects captured documents or faces. A single photograph of a letter glimpsed on a desk, or of a factory yard crowded with unusual cargo, could carry immense value. Yet photography in a neutral land carried risks. Swiss police, intent on preserving sovereignty, watched carefully for violations. Agents who grew careless could find themselves arrested, interrogated, and expelled. Still, the lure of knowledge outweighed fear, and cameras clicked quietly in streets, stations, and offices. Observation extended even to the natural world. Weather reports, seemingly mundane, became vital intelligence. Agents in Swiss valleys recorded snowfall and river levels. Knowing these details affected German troop movements in the Alps, or Allied bombing campaigns that depended on clear skies. A farmer's remark about an early thaw might appear trivial, yet it could alter the timing of operations hundreds of miles away. For ordinary Swiss, life remained deceptively calm. A woman feeding pigeons in a square or a man pausing on a bridge may have been simple citizens, or they may have been watchers, trained to note every irregularity. In Switzerland, neutrality meant peace on the surface, but beneath it pulsed an endless vigilance. The war was measured not in explosions, but in glances, footsteps, and the quiet recording of detail after detail, each one a thread woven into the vast tapestry of intelligence. Spain, too, relied heavily on the art of observation, though the style there carried a different tone. Madrid, with its crowded boulevards and elegant cafes, was a stage where people constantly watched one another. A man sipping coffee at the Gran Via might appear idle, but in reality he was noting which diplomats entered which hotels. A woman selling newspapers near the Prado could, with casual glances, record which foreign officers picked up the morning editions. In such an atmosphere, every corner of the city became a potential outpost of espionage. German agents maintained organised systems of observation. From apartments overlooking British offices, they kept logs of visitors and deliveries. In ports like Cadiz and Barcelona, sympathisers stood on piers with notebooks, marking down the tonnage and timing of Allied ships. Fishermen, often struggling with poverty, accepted small payments in exchange for reporting unusual movements. Their observations, when funneled back to Berlin, influenced U-boat deployments and convoy attacks. The Allies, however, understood the importance of counter-observation. British intelligence often staged false routines, deliberately sending junior staff on unnecessary errands to create misleading patterns. Vehicles might circle blocks before returning, creating the illusion of busy activity. Sometimes even the simple act of leaving lights on in embassy windows suggested meetings that never took place. These subtle games turned Madrid into a city of illusions, where truth and deception blended seamlessly. Beyond the capital, observations stretched into Spain's countryside. Along the Pyrenees, watchers tracked those attempting to cross into or out of the country. Some worked for German networks, eager to intercept Allied couriers. Others quietly assisted the Allies, providing warnings of patrols or safe times to move. Farmers, shepherds, and villagers, many of them neutral in politics, became silent participants in this hidden war, their knowledge of the land invaluable to both sides. Observation also extended to Spain's economic life. Mines, railways, and warehouses all drew attention. German agents monitored tungsten shipments with precision, while Allied operatives shadowed traders and merchants to see where contracts were signed. Even ledgers and invoices became targets, for numbers written in ink could reveal far more than speeches or promises. For ordinary Spaniards, the sense of being watched was real. Police patrols, informers, and rumours created a climate of caution. People spoke carefully in public, aware that strangers might be listening. In such an environment, trust was scarce, and even family members sometimes withheld thoughts for fear they might reach the wrong ears. Espionage in Spain was not only about secrets, it was about the feeling that every action might be seen, noted, and passed into the shadows of a war that never appeared openly on Iberian soil. In Switzerland, espionage also unfolded in the discreet world of finance and trade. Neutral banks in Zurich, Basel, and Bern became crossroads where the money of governments, companies, and individuals mingled. German firms deposited funds to pay for raw materials, while Allied operatives traced these flows to estimate the Reich's financial strength. Hidden behind polite conversations about investments were calculations that determined how long industries could continue producing tanks, aircraft, and weapons. Bank secrecy, fiercely guarded by Swiss law, provided a veil that both protected legitimate customers and shielded covert transfers. This secrecy made Switzerland a vital artery for espionage. Agents monitored account movements, searching for unusual deposits or withdrawals that might indicate covert deals. A sudden spike in currency exchange could reveal preparations for military campaigns. British intelligence, for example, learned much about German priorities by following financial clues rather than intercepted messages. The Swiss government was aware of the risks. Too much leniency could make their neutrality look like collaboration. Too much interference could provoke retaliation. They walked a careful path, sometimes tightening regulations, other times quietly allowing flows to continue as long as Swiss interests remained protected. Banks in turn became silent battlefields, where spies disguised as clerks, accountants, or even businessmen worked to expose or conceal financial trails. Trade also carried secrets. Switzerland imported and exported goods through surrounding nations, and every shipment revealed something. A surge in coal deliveries might hint at German shortages. Exports of specialized tools or chemicals could suggest industrial projects underway. Allied agents tracked freight trains, studied invoices, and cultivated contacts in customs offices. Germans, equally aware, tried to obscure the true scale of their supply chains, using shell companies and front organizations to disguise shipments. Neutral brokers often found themselves trapped in these games, courted by both sides and pressured to betray neither. Industrial espionage thrived in this atmosphere. Companies that produced precision instruments or pharmaceuticals became targets. Engineers might be approached in cafes with offers of money or protection, asked to share technical details. Some resisted, others cooperated, and a few cleverly passed false information, turning the tables on their would-be handlers. For ordinary Swiss citizens, the world of finance and trade seemed routine. Bank clerks processed paperwork, merchants filled orders, and trains carried goods across borders. Yet beneath these ordinary tasks lay invisible threads of war. Each transaction, each signature, each shipment could ripple outward into decisions made in Berlin, London, or Moscow. Switzerland's neutrality gave it a calm surface, but in its vaults and ledgers, the struggle of espionage was written in numbers rather than words. Spain's role in espionage was equally tied to money, trade, and resources, though the stakes were shaped by its fragile economy after the Civil War. The most valuable commodity of all was tungsten, mined in Galicia and other regions. This metal, essential for hardening steel in weapons and armour, became the focus of a fierce struggle between German and Allied intelligence. German buyers, backed by Berlin, offered high prices and political promises, while the Allies countered with even larger sums, sometimes purchasing ore only to keep it from German factories. This economic battlefield turned merchants and mine owners into unexpected players in global strategy. Allied agents worked to monitor every shipment, bribing railway workers to copy manifests and persuading miners to pass along information. A single invoice might reveal how many tons were headed toward Germany and when. British operatives in Madrid and Lisbon analysed these details, adjusting naval blockades and diplomatic pressure. At the same time, German operatives did everything possible to secure steady flows, even arranging front companies to mask purchases. The Franco regime, keen to profit but wary of overcommitting, allowed the trade to continue in both directions, turning Spain into a marketplace where tungsten was more valuable than gold. Ports and warehouses became natural extensions of this contest. In Bilbao or Cadiz, Allied observers took note of which ships were loaded with ore and which were mysteriously delayed. Sometimes sabotage followed. A shipment would be rerouted, delayed by paperwork, or lost at sea under unexplained circumstances. German agents responded by tightening their own networks, ensuring that local officials were loyal or well paid enough to guarantee safe passage. Beyond tungsten, Spain also became a centre for financial intelligence. banks in Madrid and Barcelona processed foreign funds, often disguising the true origin of deposits. Allied operatives traced these patterns to gauge German influence, while German intelligence tried to identify British efforts to bankroll propaganda or resistance abroad. For businessmen and bankers, neutrality provided opportunity, but it also carried risk. Choosing the wrong partner could mean ruin once the war shifted. The economic tug-of-war was not invisible to ordinary Spaniards. In mining towns, wages rose temporarily, but shortages remained. In cities, rumours spread about secret shipments and mysterious payments. People waiting in ration lines spoke quietly about Germany buying their resources or Britain stealing them away. While survival remained their focus, they sensed that their country had become a pawn in a greater game. Espionage in Spain was not only about coded letters or whispered meetings, it was written in contracts, cargo and coins. Each ton of tungsten, each payment cleared, carried echoes that reached the battlefields of Europe. In Switzerland, espionage also thrived in the world of exile politics. The country's neutrality made it a natural refuge for displaced leaders, activists, and resistance figures from across Europe. In Geneva and Zurich, émigré communities gathered, each bringing stories, rumours, and sometimes crucial intelligence from their homelands. Governments in exile, such as those of Poland and Czechoslovakia, maintained contacts through Switzerland, using it as a safe channel to communicate with London. These networks blurred the line between diplomacy and espionage, for every political discussion carried hints of military value. Resistance fighters moving through Switzerland often brought first-hand knowledge of conditions in occupied territories. A smuggled diary, a sketch of German fortifications, or a whispered account of morale among local populations could provide Allied analysts with insights that maps and statistics never revealed. The Swiss police tolerated much of this activity, but drew lines when operations threatened neutrality. Agents who became too visible risked arrest or deportation, forcing networks to work with quiet discipline. The Soviet Union also made use of Switzerland's position. Soviet intelligence officers cultivated ties with émigrés and trade representatives, extracting details about German industry and military plans. They often relied on intermediaries, allowing Swiss territory to act as a funnel through which information travelled eastward. The Lucy network, already a powerful source, was only one example of how Soviet intelligence benefited from Switzerland's role as Europe's silent crossroads. Allied intelligence also valued Switzerland for contact with German opposition groups. Anti-Nazi figures within the Reich occasionally reached out through Swiss channels, offering warnings or seeking support. Meetings in discreet chalets or secluded hotels allowed these dangerous conversations to take place under the cover of neutrality. Though the risks were immense, these connections helped shape Allied understanding of dissent within Germany. Beyond politics, Switzerland served as a clearinghouse for information from international organisations. The Red Cross, headquartered in Geneva, maintained extensive access across occupied Europe. While officially humanitarian, its staff often observed details, train movements, shortages, or conditions in camps that found their way into intelligence reports. These observations, carefully disguised as routine notes, sometimes became lifelines of knowledge. For ordinary Swiss citizens, the presence of exiles and activists was visible but rarely understood in its full scope. They might see foreign newspapers sold on street corners or hear unfamiliar languages in cafes, without realizing that behind these signs lay networks shaping the strategies of great powers. Neutrality gave Switzerland an air of calm, but within its borders, politics, resistance and espionage intertwined so closely that it was often impossible to tell one from the other. Spain's espionage landscape was equally shaped by exile politics, though in very different ways. After the Spanish Civil War, the country was filled with individuals who carried loyalties and resentments that foreign powers sought to exploit. Monarchists, republicans, communists, and phalangists all lived uneasily under Franco's regime, and agents from Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union tried to draw information from these divided groups. Madrid became a magnet for displaced figures from across Europe, each with stories to tell and each vulnerable to manipulation. German intelligence worked to recruit former Spanish Civil War veterans who admired Hitler's support for Franco. These men provided not only loyalty, but also networks of contacts that could be used to track Allied activities. At the same time, the British cultivated sympathisers among more moderate elements, those wary of Germany's growing dominance. British agents often met such figures in cafes or private apartments, listening carefully to their grievances and turning them into channels of information. The Soviet Union also maintained an active presence in Spain. Though relations with Franco were strained, Soviet operatives disguised their activities under the cover of trade or cultural exchanges. They targeted Spanish leftists still bitter from the Civil War, using their anger as a recruitment tool. Even a single conversation with a disillusioned worker or intellectual could yield reports about German shipments, Spanish sympathies, or rumours of policy shifts in Madrid. Lisbon, just across the border in Portugal, added another dimension. While technically outside Spain, it was part of the same Iberian network. Refugees and exiles often travelled through Spain on their way to Lisbon, where Allied embassies offered passage to the wider world. This movement created opportunities for intelligence gathering. A refugee passing through Madrid might be interviewed discreetly by British or American officers before continuing westward. Even the act of moving across Iberia became a flow of information. Economic spies also exploited Spain's fractured political environment. Mining towns, filled with workers who distrusted the regime, sometimes offered information in exchange for small payments. Dock workers, many of whom remembered the hardships of the Civil War, were willing to report unusual cargoes if it meant earning extra bread. Every political division was an opening for intelligence, every grievance a potential lever. For ordinary Spaniards, these struggles were hidden but palpable. They heard whispers in taverns, saw unfamiliar faces at train stations, and sensed that their country was a stage for forces far larger than themselves. While they tried to rebuild their lives after years of conflict, foreign agents turned their divided society into a web of opportunities, weaving exile politics into the broader war of shadows. In Switzerland, espionage frequently took shape through the quiet work of analysts rather than the daring of field agents. While couriers and informants brought fragments of data, it was in the offices of intelligence bureaus and safe houses where those fragments were turned into coherent pictures. Swiss neutrality allowed analysts from multiple sides to operate in relative safety, and this created a unique situation. Within the same city, rival groups worked simultaneously to piece together the secrets of war. In Bern and Zurich, small teams sat over maps, train schedules and industrial reports, cross-checking rumours with observable facts. A report from a refugee about shortages in a German factory might be compared with railway manifests showing unusual coal shipments. From these comparisons, analysts drew conclusions about the Reich's production levels. The process was meticulous, requiring patience more than daring, and the results could be surprisingly accurate. Allied services valued these Swiss-based analysts. British officers often received intelligence in the form of coded summaries, which condensed weeks of careful work into a few paragraphs. The Americans, newer to the intelligence game, learned quickly from Swiss intermediaries how to separate noise from truth. Soviet intelligence also benefited, often through indirect channels like the Lucy network, which passed on reports so precise they influenced decisions on the Eastern Front. Analysis in Switzerland also extended to communications. While the country officially monitored its borders, foreign powers tapped into mail routes, telegraph lines, and even commercial messages. Open-source information was transformed into intelligence when studied closely. A shipping advertisement in a newspaper, when cross-referenced with port activity, could reveal military supply chains. The neutrality of Switzerland provided a flood of information, and the skill of analysts was to sort the valuable from the trivial. Swiss authorities, aware of the scale of foreign intelligence work, attempted to limit operations that threatened their neutrality. They investigated suspicious safe houses, expelled agents who were too bold, and sometimes confiscated documents. Yet they could not prevent the flow entirely. Information was simply too abundant, too interwoven with daily life. As a result, Switzerland became a silent archive of the war, where truths and lies collided in endless stacks of papers, coded notes, and whispered testimonies. For the Swiss people, the work of analysis remained invisible. Clerks in offices, seemingly performing routine tasks, were in fact shaping decisions that would reach battlefields far away. Neutrality provided calm streets and safe borders, but in its hidden rooms, Switzerland was a crucible where the chaos of global war was distilled into knowledge. Spain's espionage story also relied heavily on analysts, though their work unfolded in an atmosphere more chaotic than that of Switzerland. Madrid was filled with reports, rumours, and half-truths carried in by diplomats, businessmen, and refugees. Sorting this flood of information into something reliable required patient minds. In dim offices above crowded streets, Allied and Axis operatives compared notes, searching for patterns that could shape strategy. A dock worker's remark about delayed shipments in Bilbao, a train conductor's story of unusual cargo near the Pyrenees, or a tavern conversation overheard in Cadiz, all were written down, sifted, and checked against other reports. German analysts in Spain worked hard to maintain clear pictures of British naval activity around Gibraltar. Every observation of ships leaving port, every rumour about convoy sizes was fed into their reports. These details, cross-referenced with other networks in Portugal and North Africa, gave Berlin guidance for submarine deployments in the Atlantic. Accuracy was essential, for even the smallest miscalculation could waste resources or leave U-boats vulnerable. Allied analysts faced their own challenges. British intelligence stations in Madrid and Lisbon received constant fragments of news, many deliberately distorted by German counterintelligence. Analysts had to decide which fragments could be trusted and which were meant to deceive. To do so, they built patterns from repetition. If several unrelated sources mentioned the same shipment, it was likely true. If a rumour appeared suddenly in multiple places at once, it might be a planted story. Lisbon played a particularly important role in this analytical web. Though Portuguese territory, its proximity to Spain meant information flowed easily across the border. Allied embassies in Lisbon collected stories brought by refugees who had passed through Spain, turning their experiences into intelligence. A French refugee's memory of German troops boarding trains in Toulouse could be cross-checked with Spanish railway observations, producing a more accurate picture of German strategy. Economic intelligence, especially around tungsten, created endless work for analysts. Contracts, invoices, and shipping receipts were examined for clues about who was winning the resource war. British operatives noted that sudden increases in German payments often signalled desperation, while delays in Spanish shipments hinted at Allied pressure working effectively. Every number carried meaning, and analysts treated ledgers as battlefields in their own right. For ordinary Spaniards, the work of these analysts was invisible. They noticed only the presence of strangers in hotels, or the quiet hum of embassy cars arriving late at night. Yet behind closed doors, patient minds transformed scraps of gossip and fragments of paper into strategies that shaped naval battles, economic blockades, and the shifting balance of a global war. In Switzerland, espionage also thrived through the subtle craft of codes and ciphers. Messages could not always be carried safely in plain words, so intelligence services relied on layers of concealment. Invisible ink, microdots, and coded telegrams all became part of daily life for agents working in Bern or Zurich. A simple postcard showing an alpine landscape might contain numbers carefully placed to represent troop movements. A love letter could in fact hide detailed reports of industrial production. Neutral territory gave spies freedom to send more mail than in occupied Europe, but it also meant Swiss authorities inspected suspicious items carefully, forcing agents to innovate constantly. Ciphers varied from simple substitution codes to highly complex systems that required trained operators. German agents often used codes transmitted by radio, while Allied spies disguised their messages inside commercial correspondence. A report on wool prices might actually conceal a warning about U-boat positions. For analysts, breaking these codes was as critical as gathering the information itself. Swiss intelligence, determined to protect neutrality, built its own cryptographic expertise. They monitored foreign transmissions, sometimes decoding them, sometimes simply recording patterns. Even when the content remained unreadable, knowing when and where messages were sent provided valuable clues. This neutral eavesdropping gave Switzerland a unique edge, though officials rarely admitted how much they knew. Allied and Axis agents also feared betrayal through poor coding practices. A courier who reused a key, or a clerk who failed to disguise handwriting, could doom an entire network. Swiss prisons held several unlucky operators caught with suspicious notebooks or radios. Yet despite the dangers, the flow of coded messages never stopped, for the war depended on information moving faster than armies. Technology added new layers. Microfilm allowed entire pages of documents to be reduced to the size of a postage stamp. These tiny images were sewn into clothing, hidden in shoe heels, or even placed inside hollow coins. A single courier could carry thousands of words without arousing suspicion. Neutral banks, too, saw deposits accompanied by cryptic notes, their true meaning known only to handlers abroad. For ordinary Swiss citizens, codes were invisible. They saw postcards, telegrams, and newspapers without realizing that within the ink lay hidden strategies shaping battles far beyond their borders. In this quiet world of concealment, Switzerland became both a laboratory and a crossroads for the coded war, where silence, patience, and secrecy mattered as much as armies on the move. Spain's espionage story also relied on codes and clever concealment, though the atmosphere in Madrid gave it a more improvisational character than the polished networks in Switzerland. German agents in Spain frequently used diplomatic channels to send coded reports back to Berlin. These were often hidden in commercial telegrams or official letters, their true meanings disguised beneath references to shipping or trade. British intelligence, watching closely, worked hard to intercept and sometimes manipulate these communications, turning Madrid into a place where every telegraph line hummed with secrets. Invisible ink was common, made from lemon juice or milk, and used on letters that looked ordinary. A simple message about family news could, when heated, reveal details of convoy movements or tungsten contracts. Spanish postal inspectors, aware of these tricks, sometimes uncovered them, but many slipped through. For Allied agents, Lisbon was often the final destination for coded messages written in Spain, as Portugal's looser controls made transmission abroad easier. Couriers carried letters across the border, then delivered them to embassies where encryption machines waited. German intelligence also made use of microfilm, reducing entire reports to tiny rolls hidden inside pens, lighters, or the linings of hats. A businessman boarding a train in Madrid might appear respectable, yet inside his belongings rested information that could influence battles across the Mediterranean. British operatives responded with countermeasures, sometimes feeding false codes into known German channels, ensuring that even when a message was delivered, its content misled. Spanish authorities themselves maintained interest in codes. The Franco regime wanted to know what foreign agents plotted, and its police occasionally broke simple ciphers. This created an extra layer of risk. A message intercepted by Spanish officials might never reach its intended destination, or worse, it could be quietly sold to the highest bidder. In such an environment, agents had to assume that every word could betray them. Propaganda leaflets also carried hidden signals. A public poster celebrating Franco or warning against communism might include a subtle mark or misprint recognized only by agents, guiding them to meeting points or confirming identities. Newspapers sometimes printed coded advertisements, with seemingly innocent phrases like "lost dog," "answers to Carlo," serving as instructions for a rendezvous. For ordinary Spaniards, these codes were invisible. They read newspapers, mailed letters, and saw posters without knowing that messages for spies were woven into the fabric of daily life. Spain's world of ciphers was less polished than Switzerland's, but no less dangerous. A stage where every envelope, every telegram, and every scrap of paper carried the potential to tip the balance of war. In Switzerland, espionage also revealed itself through the delicate world of human encounters, where personal relationships became as valuable as coded telegrams. Agents cultivated friendships, romances, and business partnerships not only for companionship but as sources of knowledge. A diplomat's secretary, flattered by attention in a cafe, might reveal schedules or hints of confidential meetings. A banker, persuaded by promises of influence, could allow discreet access to records. Even casual friendships carried weight, for in a neutral land where many nationalities mingled, every conversation was an opportunity. Recruitment was a constant theme. Allied and Axis operatives both sought to turn ordinary citizens into informants. Sometimes this was done with money, other times with ideology, and occasionally through subtle pressure. A refugee grateful for safe passage might be asked to report on who else crossed the border. A businessman, eager to keep contracts with German companies, might be persuaded to share details with British agents. The line between loyalty and survival was thin, and many found themselves drawn into espionage unwillingly. Double agents were a frequent result of this complex environment. A courier who believed he served only one side might, without knowing, be feeding information to both. In some cases, individuals deliberately played both ends, taking payments from Allied and Axis handlers. Such duplicity was dangerous, but it also reflected the ambiguity of life in neutral Switzerland. Allegiance was often less about ideology and more about survival in a Europe consumed by war. The Swiss authorities, aware of this constant recruitment, watched carefully but rarely intervened unless neutrality itself was threatened. They understood that their nation could not be free of spies, so they aimed instead to keep the game balanced, ensuring that neither side gained overwhelming influence. For the agents themselves, personal encounters were both powerful and perilous. Trust was rare, betrayal common. A smile across a table might open doors, but it might also conceal a trap. Agents lived with the awareness that even those closest to them could be compromised. Yet without these human links, espionage could not function. Reports, codes, and analyses all began with a single conversation, a whispered word, a shared drink. For ordinary Swiss citizens, these hidden dynamics were invisible. They saw businessmen discussing contracts, couples strolling by lakes, and travellers meeting in hotels without realising that beneath the surface, such encounters shaped the flow of secrets across Europe. In Switzerland's calm streets, the War of Shadows often began not with radio signals or documents, but with the fragile, unpredictable ties of human trust. Spain's espionage world, like Switzerland's, ultimately came down to human relationships, where loyalty, fear, and ambition shaped the flow of secrets. In Madrid, Barcelona, and Seville, spies leaned not only on codes and couriers, but on trust built through careful conversation. A waiter in a popular cafe might befriend foreign diplomats, listening quietly as they relaxed after long meetings. A hotel clerk, noticing which guests met in private rooms, could be persuaded to share details for a few coins. Even a neighbour overhearing voices through thin walls might become an informer, his gossip passing into the files of German or British agents. Recruitment was constant. German intelligence sought allies among officers still grateful for Nazi support during the Civil War, while British agents targeted those suspicious of Berlin's growing power. Soviet operatives, though less visible, quietly approached workers, students, and intellectuals with promises of ideological solidarity. Each camp relied on personal persuasion, and many Spaniards found themselves drawn into the shadow war not from conviction but from survival. Money, food, or protection could mean the difference between silence and cooperation. Double agents flourished in this uncertain world. A Spanish businessman might sell tungsten contracts to the Germans, while secretly reporting shipment details to the British. A journalist could write articles favouring Berlin, yet passed drafts to Allied handlers before publication. Playing both sides was dangerous, but it offered opportunities for those willing to risk exposure. Some did so out of greed, others out of desperation, and a few because they believed neutrality itself demanded flexibility. The Spanish police and secret services, aware of constant recruitment, monitored carefully. They arrested or expelled agents who pushed too far but often allowed activities to continue if they did not threaten Franco's hold on power. The regime itself occasionally used foreign agents as bargaining tools, trading tolerance for diplomatic concessions. This delicate balance meant that espionage in Spain was never fully hidden, nor fully exposed, existing instead in a grey zone where everyone knew spies were present, yet few could identify them with certainty. For ordinary Spaniards, the consequences of these hidden battles were indirect but real. Rumours filled taverns, shortages reflected economic espionage, and the quiet presence of strangers in neighbourhoods reminded them that their country was a stage for foreign struggles. They endured ration lines and censorship, while above them decisions were influenced by secrets whispered in embassies, cafes, and hotel rooms. By the end of the war, Spain remained officially neutral, but its neutrality had been shaped, tested, and in many ways defined by espionage. Just as Switzerland had served as Europe's hidden crossroads, Spain had been its smoky theatre, a place where alliances were tested, lies were traded, and the fate of battles was shaped by the fragile threads of human trust.